I came home that morning smelling like bleach and floor wax, my knees so stiff from 8 hours of mopping that I had to take the porch steps one at a time, sideways, holding the rail like a much older woman than I am. The sun wasn't even up, and the first thing my son-in-law said to me, before I'd set my keys down, before I'd had a sip of water, was, "You're gonna wash that smell off before you go in the kitchen, right? It gets on the dishes." That was when I knew. Not that they were tired of me, that they didn't see me at all anymore. I'd become a smell to manage, a thing that tracked the night and on its shoes. I didn't say anything. I never did. Back then, I just stood there in my own front hall, in the house I paid off with 30 years of double shifts, and I looked at the scuff marks on the floor I'd waxed myself last spring. And I thought, all right, then, let me back up, because if I start at the end, you'll think I'm a hard woman, and I'm not. I want you to understand how a person gets here, how you can love someone so much you hand them your whole life, piece by piece, and not even notice your hands are empty until somebody comments on the smell. My name is Lucille. I'm 64. I worked the overnight cleaning crew at the county hospital, 3 to 11 most nights, but I took the 11 to 7 graveyard shift whenever they give it to me, because it paid $1.10 more an hour, and because by then I needed every $1.10 I could get. My husband Earl passed 11 years ago, heart sudden, in his recliner with the ball game on. We'd built that house together the long way, the only way people like us could. A little at a time, a room added the summer he got the raise. The back porch screened in the year I stopped smoking, and we put the cigarette money toward lumber. It was paid off the year he died. I remember signing the last check and crying, and him laughing at me, saying, "We finally own the place, and now we're too old to enjoy it." We weren't. We just didn't get the chance. After Earl, the house was too quiet, so when my daughter called and said she and her husband had hit a rough patch, his hours cut at the plant, then gone altogether, and her own job barely covering the daycare, well, what was I going to say? She's my only child. She was crying on the phone. "Just till we get back on our feet, Mom." I said, "Of course." I said, "This is your home too. It always was." I meant it with everything in me. That was 6 years ago. I gave them the 2 bedrooms upstairs, mine and the guest room, because the kids needed space. A grandson, 12 at the time, and a little granddaughter who was 4 and slept like a furnace. I moved my own bed down into the den, the room Earl used to call the sewing room, because that's where I'd kept my machine and my baskets. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things. I put my dresser in the garage and lived out of a couple of boxes, and I thought, this is what a mother does. You make yourself small so your children can stretch out. There's even something nice in it, the first while. The house was loud again. There were little shoes by the door. My granddaughter would climb into my lap and fall asleep, and I'd sit there with my arm going numb because I didn't want to move and wake her. I want to be fair because for a long time I wasn't fair to myself, and I won't make the opposite mistake now. It didn't go bad all at once. It went bad the way the floor in our old kitchen went bad. One soft spot you step around and then another, and one day you realize the whole thing's rotted out underneath and you've just gotten used to walking funny. The first year, my son-in-law looked for work. I'll give him that. The second year, he looked less. By the third, he'd settled into something he called consulting, which as far as I could tell meant he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and got irritated when anyone made noise. My daughter went back to work full-time, and somewhere in there it became my job to do the school pickups, the dinners, the laundry. I didn't mind the grandkids. I'll never say I minded the grandkids. But I'd come off a shift, I'd have slept 4 hours, and there'd be a basket of their clothes by my door with a note, never a please, just darks, written on a sticky note like an instruction to the help. And here's the part I need you to hear, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, why didn't she just say something? Why'd she let it go on? I've read that on people's faces my whole life. That little flicker that means they've decided I must be weak or stupid or both to have put up with it. I did say something, more than once. The first time, it was about the bills. 3 years in, The utilities had crept up. 4 people running the AC, the dryer going every day, the water. I sat my daughter down, calm, kind, and I said, "Honey, I think it might be fair if you and your husband could chip in a little toward the electric. Not rent, just the extra you all bring." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. She said, "Mom, we are barely keeping our heads above water. I cannot believe you'd put a price on family." And then she cried, and then I was the one apologizing, comforting her, telling her forget I said anything. Of course, family doesn't keep a ledger. The second time, I tried to talk to her about how her husband spoke to me. The little jabs. He'd started calling me the night owl in that voice. He told me once, in front of the kids, that I should maybe think about a job that didn't make me smell like a janitor's closet, and everybody laughed, even my grandson. And I laughed too, because what else do you do when the laughing's already started? When I brought it up to my daughter, privately, she sighed the way you sigh at a child. "Mom, don't start. He's under a lot of pressure. Can you not make everything into a thing?" So you see, I did try the talking. I tried the sitting down. I tried the gentle word. And every time, somehow, I was the problem. I was the one making it into a thing. After a while, you stop. Not because you're a doormat, but because you've learned that opening your mouth only ever costs you, never them. You learn to keep the peace because the peace is the only thing in the house that's still partly yours. By the 6th year, I disappeared. I mean that almost literally. They'd taken Earl's chair out of the living room, his recliner, the one he died in. The one I kept, because sometimes I'd sit in it at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, and I swear I could still smell him in the upholstery. They'd put it in the garage to make room for a sectional they bought on a credit card. My grandson had stopped looking at me when he talked to me. My granddaughter, who used to fall asleep in my lap, was 9 now and rolled her eyes the way she learned from her mother. The mailbox out front had my son-in-law's name on it. He'd put it there himself with one of those label kits, right under mine, like he was filing a claim. And me, I slept on a pull-out in the sewing room, and I worked nights, and I came home smelling like bleach. And somewhere along the way, I'd agreed to be furniture in my own house, the kind nobody notices until it's in the way. The morning it broke wasn't even a dramatic morning. That's the thing about these breaking points. You expect thunder. And you get a Tuesday. I came off the graveyard shift and there was a strange flatness to the front yard, and it took me a second to understand what I was looking at. Folding tables, card tables, a clothesline strung between 2 sawhorses with old jackets pinned to it. They'd had a yard sale on my lawn while I was at work. And right there at the center of it, with a strip of masking tape on the arm that said $25, was Earl's recliner. It was already sold. There was a Seach sticker slapped over the price. Some man was backing his truck up the drive to load it. I don't remember walking across the grass. I remember my hand on the chair and my voice coming out smaller than I wanted it to, asking my daughter. She was at the money table with a coffee can full of singles. I asked her, "Did you sell your father's chair?" And she didn't even look up from counting. She said, "Mom, it was falling apart. It smelled. We needed the room. It smelled." There it was again. Everything I touched, everything I loved. It smelled. It was in the way. It needed managing. My grandson was leaning on the porch rail with his phone, and he looked up just long enough to say in a flat little voice, mimicking me, "Did you sell your father's chair?" And he snorted at his own joke, and a couple of the kids he had over snickered along. And my son-in-law, carrying a box of Earl's old fishing tackle out to the curb, the trash, said the thing. He said it easy, like it was nothing, like he was commenting on the weather. He said, "Relax, it's just taking up space, like a lot of things around here. Like a lot of things around here." I let the man take the chair. I stood on my lawn in my dirty scrubs, and I watched a stranger drive off with the last thing my husband ever sat in, and I didn't cry and I didn't shout. Something quieter than that happened. Something settled in me, cold and clear, like the bottom of a glass of water finally going still. I thought very plainly, the way you think a thought you've been not thinking for years, this is my house. My name is on the deed, and I am going to take it back. I went inside. I rinsed my hands at the kitchen sink because God forbid I smell up the dishes. And then I went to the sewing room and I sat on the edge of the pullout and I took my phone out and I didn't call my daughter and I didn't call to argue. I called Geneva. Geneva and I cleaned hospital rooms together for 9 years before her hip gave out and she retired. She is the bluntest woman I have ever known and the only person in my life who never once told me I was making things into a thing. I told her about the chair. I told her about, like a lot of things around here. There was a long pause on the line, and then she said, "Lucille, honey, how long are you going to keep paying rent to live in your own house?" I said, "I don't pay rent. It's mine." She said, "You pay in your knees. You pay in your sleep. You pay every time that man tells you you stink in the house you built. That's rent. That's the highest rent in town." And then she said the thing that finally turned the key. She said, "You've spent 6 years afraid that if you stand up for yourself, you'll lose your family. Sweetheart, look around. You already lost them. The only thing left to lose is you." I didn't sleep that day. I lay on the pullout with the blinds down, listening to the TV through the floor, my daughter's husband laughing at something, and I thought about all the years I'd kept quiet to keep the peace, and I realized there hadn't been any peace. There'd been a slow surrender that I'd dressed up as love so I could stand it. The next morning, after my shift, I didn't come straight home. I drove to a little strip mall 2 towns over, to an attorney whose name Geneva had given me, a woman named Ms. Hadley, and I sat in her waiting room in my scrubs feeling like an imposter. Like at any moment, somebody would tell me people like me don't get to do things like this. Miss Hadley was younger than my daughter. She had a way of listening without making faces. I told her the whole thing. Flat, no tears, just the facts, the deed, the years, the chair. I told her I felt foolish even being there. She slid a box of tissues across the desk that I didn't use, and she said, "Mrs. Lucille, can I ask you something? Whose name is on the mortgage? Whose name is on the deed, the tax records, the utilities?" "Mine. All of it. The utilities, the deed, the homeowner's insurance. Every bill that came to that house came in my name because I was the one who paid it. My daughter and her husband weren't on a single document anywhere. In the eyes of the law, they weren't even tenants. They were guests who'd never left." "Then this is more straightforward than you think," Ms. Hadley said. "They have no ownership interest. None. We'll start with a formal notice. 30 days. If they don't go, we file." File. The word should have frightened me. Instead, I felt something open up in my chest like a window in a closed room. I signed the papers right there. And I want to tell you about that moment, because for 6 years, I tried to use my voice, and my voice had never once been enough. It had always been turned back on me. But a signature doesn't cry. A signature can't be told it's making things into a thing. I put my pen to that paper, and I signed my own name, the name that was on the deed, the name on the mailbox under his label. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like the woman who'd helped build that house instead of the ghost who haunted its garage. The notice came certified. I made sure of that. I wanted a record, a date, a signature on the other end too. I was working when it arrived, but I heard about it the second I walked in the door that morning. My daughter was waiting up. She had the letter in her hand, and her face was a color I'd never seen on her. "What is this?" she said. Not a question. "Mom, what is this?" "It's a notice," I said. I was so calm it scared me a little. "You have 30 days. 30 days to what? To find somewhere to live." She laughed, this disbelieving little bark. "This is our home." And I said, and I thought about how I'd say it. I'd practiced it the way I used to practice asking for a raise. I said, "No, this is my home. It has always been my home. I let you live in it. There's a difference." And I forgot it for 6 years, and I'm done forgetting it. Then her husband came down, and there was shouting, his more than hers. He told me I was crazy. He told me I couldn't do this, that there were laws, that they had rights, that the kids, and he played the kids hard. He said, "How could I do this to my own grandchildren?" And 6 months earlier, that would have folded me right up. The grandkids. But I'd had the cold, clear morning on the lawn, and I'd had Geneva's voice in my ear, and I'd had a piece of paper with my own name on it, and I said, "If you cared so much about my grandchildren having a home, you might have thought about that before you sold their grandfather's chair off my lawn to make room for a couch you can't afford." He had nothing for that. My daughter started to cry, and I felt the old pull, the old need to cross the room and make it better, and I held still. I held so still. I said, "I love you. I will always love you, but I am not going to disappear so you can be comfortable. Not anymore." The 30 days were the longest of my life. They didn't make it easy. My son-in-law gave me the silent treatment, then tried to charm me, then tried the kids again. My daughter cycled through fury and tears and long stretches of slamming cabinets. My grandson, to his credit, or maybe just out of teenage indifference, mostly stayed in his room. My granddaughter asked me one night, in the hallway, quiet, "Grandma, are you kicking us out because you don't love us?" And that one nearly did it. That one nearly broke the whole thing. I knelt down in front of her. My niece screamed, but I did it. And I said, "No, baby. I love you so much. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. But sometimes loving people means you stop letting them treat you like you don't matter. Because if you let them do it to you, you teach them they can do it to anybody. And I don't want you growing up thinking that's how you treat the people who love you." She didn't understand it then. I hope she will someday. Around day 20, my son-in-law tried the courts himself, called some legal aid line, and learned what Ms. Hadley already knew, that he had nothing. No lease, no payments, no name on anything. The thing he'd assumed was his by squatting in it was never his at all. I heard him on the phone in the garage, his voice getting smaller and smaller, and I won't pretend I didn't feel something hard and satisfied in me, listening to it. I'd carried that house on my back for 6 years while he called himself a consultant. Let him learn what the deed says. They were gone by the deadline. They went to her husband's brother's place, 2 states away. The very arrangement my daughter had once told me was impossible. Beneath them, out of the question. Funny how fast impossible becomes Tuesday when there's a date on a letter. The morning they left, I didn't watch them load the truck. I sat on the back porch. Earl screened in with our cigarette money, and I drank my coffee, and I let them go. My daughter came out before they pulled away. She stood in the doorway, and she didn't say sorry. I didn't expect sorry. That's not the kind of thing my daughter knows how to say. But she said, "I hope you're happy in this big empty house all by yourself." She meant it to wound, and I sat there after the truck was gone, and I waited for it to wound, and it didn't. The house wasn't empty. For the first time in 6 years, the house was mine. And that's not the same as empty. Not even close. I'm not going to tell you the quiet after was easy. The first few weeks, I rattled around in all that room not knowing what to do with myself, and I'd reach for the phone to call my daughter out of habit and then remember, and that hurt. I won't lie. Grief and relief turn out to feel almost the same in the body. But I cleaned out the garage. I brought my dresser back inside into the upstairs bedroom that used to be mine, and I made the bed with the good sheets. And I slept in a real bed for the first time in 6 years, and I slept 11 hours. And then Lacey came. Lacey is my late sister's granddaughter, my grandniece, though we never bothered much with the technical word. She'd been couch surfing while she finished her nursing program at the community college, and Geneva, who knows everybody's business, mentioned to me that the girl was a semester from her degree and an hour from her school and sleeping on a friend's floor. I had 4 empty rooms. I called her up. I said, "I've got more house than I know what to do with, and you've got more school than you've got bed. Come stay. No rent. Just be decent." She cried on the phone. The first thing she did when she moved in was ask me where she could put her things so they wouldn't be in my way. The second thing she did, after her first night, was wash her own dishes and then mine. I told her she didn't have to. She looked at me like I was a little slow and said, "You're letting me live here for free while I get my license. The least I can do is not leave you a mess." It was such a small thing, it nearly knocked me over. 6 years, and not one of them had thought to do the dishes. And this girl did it the first morning without being asked, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Because to her it was. We fell into a rhythm, Lacey and I. She had her textbooks and her clinical rotations. I had my shifts, though I'd started cutting back, taking the earlier hours, my knees thanking me. She'd leave me a plate in the microwave when she made dinner. I'd leave the porch light on for her late nights. Sundays, I made pancakes, the way I used to for Earl, and she'd come down in her old robe with her hair every which way. And we'd eat at the kitchen table, and she'd tell me about the patients she wasn't supposed to tell me about. And I'd tell her about Earl, and about her great-grandmother, my sister. The way she cut the crusts off her toast, her whole life like a child. One Sunday, she put her fork down and looked at me and said, "Can I ask you something? Do you regret it? Making them leave?" I thought about it honestly, because she deserved an honest answer. I thought about my grandson's flat little voice, and my granddaughter in the hallway, and the chair driving off in a stranger's truck. I said, "I regret that it came to that. I regret 6 years of my life I'll never get back. But making them leave? No, not for 1 second. The only thing I regret is that I waited until I was 64 to find out my own name still meant something." She nodded slow, the way young people do when an old person says something they'll understand better in 30 years. Then she got up and refilled my coffee without my asking, and she said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you found out." A while later, I got a note. It came in the mail, my granddaughter's handwriting, careful and round. She's 12 now. It said she missed the pancakes and she was sorry she rolled her eyes, and she'd been thinking about what I said in the hallway. There was no apology from the grown-ups attached, nothing from my daughter. But that note from a 12-year-old, I keep it in the drawer of my nightstand next to Earl's watch. Maybe that's where the road back starts. Maybe it doesn't. I've learned not to give away my whole heart in advance anymore, not even to people I love. Especially to people I love. Lacey got her license last month. She passed her boards on the first try, and we drove 2 towns over to a real restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins, and I paid. And I didn't let her argue. She's got a job at the hospital now, not cleaning, nursing, in the cardiac unit. And she says she thinks of Earl every time she's up there. She'll be getting her own apartment closer to work soon, not because I asked. Because she's ready. And that's what ready looks like. She told me she's keeping Sunday pancakes, though, that she'll drive back over. I believe her. With Lacey, when she says a thing, she does it. I've forgotten what that was like, to be able to believe a person. Sometimes now, I sit out on Earl's screened porch in the evening, with the light going gold through the trees, and I think about the woman I was a year ago, bent sideways on her own porch steps, rinsing her hands so she wouldn't offend the dishes, sleeping in the sewing room, apologizing for taking up space in a house she built with her own 2 hands. I want to reach back through time and shake her. And I want to hold her too, both at once. So let me say something to you, whoever you are, if you stayed with me this long. Maybe you're standing in a hallway right now in a house you can't quite call yours anymore. Maybe you've gone so quiet for so long, you started to wonder if you were ever loud, if you ever took up any room at all. Maybe somebody you love has told you in so many words that you're just taking up space. I know how that settles into a person. I carried it for 6 years. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. It is not too late, and you are not too old, and you are not asking for too much when you ask to matter in your own life. You don't have to shout. I never did. Mine wasn't a story of slam doors and screaming. Mine was a quiet woman who finally put her pen to a piece of paper with her own name on it. That was all it took. One signature. One word said plain. One morning you decide you're done disappearing. The chair is gone. I'll never get it back, and some nights that still aches. But the house is mine, and my name is on the mailbox without anyone's label stuck under it. And there's a girl who washes the dishes and calls on Sundays, and I sleep in a real bed now. 11 hours when my body wants them. I gave away most of a life trying to be small enough to keep. I don't recommend it. But I'll tell you the truth, it's never too late to take the rest of it back. Start with one no. The rest comes easier than you'd think.